Fyodor Dostoevsky holds a prominent position in literary history, esteemed as one of the most significant novelists ever. His imaginative writings are replete with profound understandings of human psychology, notably the dynamic relationship between our inner mental lives and the diverse social and political systems that shape the contemporary world. This depth of perception has established him as both a celebrated psychologist and a deep philosopher. His literary contributions prompt a critical examination of our genuine self-awareness, our authentic desires, and the methods we employ to contemplate and achieve our goals within the world. Furthermore, his works illuminate the repercussions of embracing deceptive illusions and pursuing unattainable aspirations. The perceptive observations and cautionary messages he conveyed regarding humanity, both at the individual and collective levels, transcended the era in which he lived and arguably remain pertinent and largely ignored lessons for our time. Born in Moscow, Russia, in 1821, Fyodor Dostoevsky's early life was shaped by his upbringing in a prosperous Orthodox Christian family. His father, a well-established physician, provided a home for his family on the grounds of the hospital where he practiced medicine. However, Dostoevsky's adolescence was marked by loss. His mother succumbed to tuberculosis during his teenage years. While he was pursuing engineering studies away at school, his father passed away under unclear circumstances, with rumors suggesting a vengeful murder by his own serfs due to his harsh treatment of them, at least formative experiences, his proximity to illness and suffering in the hospital environment, his religious family background, and the premature deaths of his parents, particularly the mysterious death of his father, likely contributed to the development of his distinct and often tragic literary perspective. After completing his education at a military engineering institution, Dostoevsky initially worked as an engineer. Nevertheless, his growing passion for literature and the humanities led him to supplement his income by translating books. As his literary inclinations intensified, he made the decisive choice to leave his engineering career behind and dedicate himself entirely to writing. In 1846, he achieved his first literary milestone with the publication of his book, Poor Folk. This work garnered immediate commercial success and received positive reviews from contemporary literary critics who recognized it as Russia's pioneering social novel. However, the novels that followed this initial triumph struggled to attain similar levels of acclaim, and Dostoevsky soon found himself in a period of artistic experimentation and perceived failure, which quickly resulted in financial difficulties. Contributing to his precarious financial situation in 1847, during his late 20s, Dostoevsky became involved with a radical group of writers and intellectuals who espoused utopian socialist ideals. This association, however, had serious consequences. When the government began to suppress individuals connected to such groups, Dostoevsky was among those arrested. In 1849, as punishment for his involvement, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. On December 22nd of that year, he faced what he believed to be his final moments. As the executioners aimed their weapons, a last-minute reprieve arrived, and Dostoevsky was pardoned. Execution was revealed to be a staged event, a psychological tactic intended to instill fear in the prisoners. Following this traumatic experience, Dostoevsky was sent to Siberia, where he endured for years of arduous forced labor in harsh and inhumane conditions. Upon his return from Siberia in 1860, Dostoevsky was a changed man. He soon resumed his writing career, but his literary voice now possessed a new quality, characterized by pessimism, realism, and a profound understanding of the human psyche. He had moved away from the utopian social ideals of his earlier involvement, and instead directed his focus inward, exploring spiritual and psychological themes. Over the subsequent 2 decades, until his death from a lung ailment in 1881, Dostoevsky produced a series of highly successful and enduring masterpieces. These works, including Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, and the Brothers Karamazov, continue to be regarded as some of the most significant contributions to world literature. A central and recurring theme in Dostoevsky's work is his insightful examination of human suffering, specifically the ways in which humanity attempts to overcome and eliminate suffering and the ramifications of these efforts, particularly within a historical context where traditional religious and spiritual frameworks were eroding. leaving individuals and societies to construct their own worldviews. Based on an increasing emphasis on rationality and technological advancement in pursuit of an ideal state of perfect well-being, in his work Notes from Underground, published in 1864, Fyodor Dostoevsky undertakes an exploration and critique of prevailing modern Western ideals, specifically the notion that rationality and technological advancement serve as the primary means to achieve ultimate happiness and goodness. The narrative of the novel follows the experiences and reflections of an unnamed retired civil servant, commonly known as the Underground Man, as they are revealed through a series of diary entries. This character is portrayed as harboring deep-seated anger and unhappiness, coupled with a strong sense of disdain for others and the self-deceptive illusions they embrace. His underlying motivation is to compel others to recognize what he perceives as the fundamental truth of existence and to acknowledge the same feelings of discontent and absurdity that he himself experiences as inherent aspects of life. For Dostoevsky, suffering is not merely a peripheral element of human existence, but rather a core principle deeply ingrained within our very being, almost as if it were an intrinsic component of our blood. Consequently, he posits that no form of existence, whether considered from a social or material standpoint, can ever truly be free from suffering. Therefore, according to Dostoevsky's perspective, all the endeavors and accomplishments associated with progress, whether pursued by individuals or by humanity as a whole, ultimately limited to altering the specific sources from which our suffering originates. These advancements, regardless of their apparent significance, are incapable of achieving a comprehensive eradication of suffering from the human condition. As Dostoevsky himself eloquently stated, man only likes to count his troubles. He doesn't calculate his happiness. From Dostoevsky's viewpoint, given the inherent impossibility of establishing any social or material framework that can effectively liberate humanity from unhappiness or suffering, the objective aimed at progressively transforming the world towards an idealized utopian state is ultimately destined for failure. Through the character of the Underground Man, Dostoevsky offers a significant critique and a cautionary message regarding humanity's pursuit of such ideals, particularly when operating within the increasingly influential worldviews of nihilism, utopianism, rationalism, and egoism. These philosophical perspectives essentially converge into the belief that life lacks any inherent or transcendent meaning, and that human actions and morality should be based solely on reason and knowledge. With self-interest serving as the primary driving force, Dostoevsky, however, strongly contended that in the absence of religious faith, and given the fundamentally flawed and often irrational nature of human beings, this particular worldview would inevitably lead to destructive outcomes. He argued that in the very process of attempting to resolve suffering and achieve a state of perfection, the solutions devised to address existing problems would invariably generate new problems, thus necessitating further solutions. Moreover, he warned that the more ambitious and grandiose these initial solutions, the more intricate and potentially devastating the resultant new problems would likely become. This is not to imply that Dostoevsky viewed all efforts directed towards social, technological, or personal improvement as inherently pointless or negative. Rather, his argument centered on the inherent limitations of such endeavors in achieving their often stated ultimate goals. Furthermore, he cautioned that if these pursuits were not carefully considered within the inherent constraints of the human condition, their relentless momentum could inadvertently exacerbate the very problems they sought to alleviate. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky articulated this profound insight with characteristic directness. Now I ask you, what can be expected of man, since he is a being endowed with strange qualities? Shower upon him every earthly blessing, drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species, and even then, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick. He would even risk his cakes, and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive good sense his fatal, fantastic element. It is just his fantastic dreams, his vulgar folly that he will desire to retain, simply in order to prove to himself as though that were so necessary that men still are men, and not the keys of a piano. For Dostoevsky, a fundamental characteristic of humanity is its inherent irrationality and its unceasing desire for a sense of self-agency. A feeling of being in control of one's own existence, rather than the mere attainment of perfect happiness. To everyone, humanity would likely choose to descend into madness or actively destroy these perfect conditions rather than exist as mere components within a predictable mechanical system. Dostoevsky suggests that our conscious desires for happiness are often at odds with our deeper, more fundamental inclinations. We may intellectually believe we yearn for happiness, but our lived experiences frequently contradict this notion. He points to the common human tendency to dwell on negativity, to find reasons for complaint, and even to engage in self-sabotaging behaviors, even in moments when happiness is within reach. Our conscious minds may articulate a desire for peace and perfect equality. Yet our actions, our behaviors, and the entirety of human history reveal a frequent inclination towards the very opposite. Dostoevsky's analysis underscores a profound disconnect between our perceived self-awareness and our actual nature. We often lack a true understanding of our own motivations and desires. And even when moments of clarity arise, we frequently struggle to accept the uncomfortable truths about ourselves. In his subsequent literary masterpiece, Crime and Punishment, which saw publication in 1866, Dostoevsky further investigates the concept of self-knowledge, or rather, the frequent absence thereof. The narrative of this novel revolves around Rodion Raskolnikov, a young man and former law student who exists in a state of poverty. Raskolnikov's mother and sister make significant personal sacrifices in their endeavors to improve his circumstances and facilitate his future success. With his sister even contemplating marriage to a man of wealth as a means of providing aid. However, these acts of familial devotion serve only to intensify Raskolnikov's distress and shame. Furthermore, he is profoundly influenced by a worldview characterized by nihilism, rationalism, and atheism. Operating under the sway of these beliefs and feeling unbound by religious or spiritual doctrines, Raskolnikov resolves to murder and rob an elderly pawnbroker, a woman he perceives as morally reprehensible and whom he knows to possess a considerable sum of money. His conviction rests on the principle that moral decisions should be based on a rational assessment of what action will yield the greatest overall benefit to society, or in utilitarian terms, the greatest happiness for the largest number of individuals. Consequently, he rationalizes that he is more deserving of the money than the old woman, as he believes he can utilize it to achieve far greater good, including assisting his mother and sister in pursuing a legal career that would enable him to contribute even more significantly to the world. Moreover, Raskolnikov conceives of himself as an exceptional individual, possessing inherent greatness, power, and a capacity for ruthlessness. Such extraordinary individuals are permitted to transgress conventional moral boundaries for the sake of the greater good. Thus, he arrives at a rational justification for the act of murder and proceeds to kill the pawnbroker, and subsequently, her half-sister, who unexpectedly enters the scene during the crime. Throughout the remainder of the novel, Raskolnikov finds himself increasingly tormented and consumed by overwhelming guilt and horror. It's a direct consequence of his actions. The reality of his emotional and psychological response reveals that he is not the man of ruthless power he had envisioned. Instead, he is a man of profound tenderness and deep feeling. Ultimately teetering on the edge of insanity, he makes the decision to surrender himself to the police. Through Raskolnikov's profound guilt and torment, Dostoevsky offers a critique of the limitations of reason and self-interest. As comprehensive frameworks for determining morality and understanding the self, Raskolnikov possessed what he believed to be logical reasons for his actions. Yet those actions were fundamentally wrong and resulted in immense personal pain and suffering. Echoing the themes explored in Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky again challenges the core tenets of nihilism, utilitarianism, rationalism, and egoism, philosophical perspectives that prioritize the individual and emphasize self-interest and rationality as the primary drivers for maximizing both individual and societal well-being. Similarly to Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment delves into the intricate complexity of the human mind and the frequent disconnect between our conscious perception and articulation of who we believe ourselves to be and the deeper, often contradictory reality of our true nature. Furthermore, Dostoevsky highlights the often significant chasm between our perceptions of others and the objective truth of their being. He not only illustrates Raskolnikov's profoundly inverted and false self-perception, but also masterfully allows the reader to connect with, and even empathize, the character who has committed a cold-blooded murder. Rather than simply depicting the descent of a purely evil character into further depravity, Dostoevsky reveals the nuanced reality that even a bad character is not entirely devoid of humanity and shares, in many ways, common ground with the reader, exhibiting profound confusion and being misguided by the internal conflicts of their own psyche and a fundamental misunderstanding of that very psyche. Dostoevsky's narrative suggests that for all of us, the complex interplay between our conscious mind, our unconscious mind, and the external world is inherently chaotic, often muddled and contradictory, and perhaps ultimately beyond the capacity of complete human understanding. He implies that the distance between ourselves and those we fear or dislike is often less significant than we might believe. Within them resides some aspect of ourselves, and conversely, within us exists some element of them. Dostoevsky's exploration extends to the very nature of human desire and self-deception. He suggests that we often lack genuine self-awareness, pursuing goals that do not truly align with our deepest needs, and frequently fearing or dreading the very things we truly desire. He posits that we are far less rational than we typically believe, exhibiting forms of irrationality and even a kind of madness in our daily lives and across generations. He critiques the potential for both idealistic philosophies, including certain interpretations of Christianity, to set us up for disillusionment, and he questions the absolute capacity of science and technology to provide ultimate solutions to our fundamental human problems, suggesting that they may merely transform rather than eliminate our inherent struggles. Dostoevsky arguably believed these observations to hold significant truth. However, the conclusion of crime and punishment offers a subtle glimmer of hope. Raskolnikov, despite his heinous crime, receives a relatively lenient sentence of only 8 years of penal servitude, ostensibly for a later act of confession and a degree of remorse. The novel concludes with an allusion to the continuation of Raskolnikov's story, hinting at Dostoevsky's underlying belief that through suffering, faith, acceptance, compassion, and repentance, a form of redemption, however arduous, remains a possibility. Thus, while Dostoevsky's literary landscape is often characterized by darkness and tragedy, it frequently contains this unexpected element of potential redemption, a glimmer of hope that emerges, despite the overwhelming bleakness, at least a redemption of a certain kind. This theme of redemption is further explored in his subsequent novel, The Idiot, published in 1869. Through the central character of Prince Mishkin, Dostoevsky reflects on some of his own personal experiences and ideals in life. In one particular instance, Prince Mishkin recounts an anecdote about a man who describes his experience of being arrested and sentenced to a mock execution by firing squad, an event that almost exactly mirrors Dostoevsky's own harrowing experience many years prior. Prince Mishkin relays the man's thoughts. He had about 5 minutes left to live, not more. He said those 5 minutes seemed like an endless time to him, an enormous wealth, ... He reckoned up the time for bidding his comrades farewell and allotted 2 minutes to that, then allotted 2 more minutes to thinking about himself for the last time, and then to looking around for the last time, ... He was dying at the age of 27, healthy and strong. Bidding farewell to his comrades, he remembered asking one of them a rather irrelevant question, and even being very interested in the answer. Then, after he had bidden his comrades farewell, the 2 minutes came that he had allotted to thinking about himself. He knew beforehand what he was going to think about. He kept wanting to picture to himself as quickly and vividly as possible how it could be like this. Now he exists and lives. And in 3 minutes, there would be something, some person or thing, but who and where? He wanted to resolve it all in those 2 minutes. There was a church nearby, and the top of the cathedral with its gilded dome shone in the bright sun. He remembered gazing with terrible fixity at that dome and the rays shining from it. It seemed to him that those were his new nature, and in 3 minutes he would somehow merge with them. The ignorance of and loathing for this new thing that would be and would come presently were terrible. Yet he said that nothing was more oppressive for him at that moment than the constant thought, what if I were not to die? What if life were given back to me? What infinity? It would all be mine. Then I'd turn each minute into a whole age. I'd lose nothing. I'd reckon up every minute separately. I'd let nothing be wasted. He said that in the end, this thought turned into such anger in him that he wished they would hurry up and shoot him. In this passage, Dostoevsky arguably alludes to the idea that although life is so often characterized by tragedy, and the attainment of purity and perfect goodness is impossible while suffering remains a fundamental aspect of human existence. The conscious awareness of being mere moments away from losing it all is so overwhelmingly horrible that one would literally prefer to hasten death rather than dwell on the profound beauty of existence and the imminence of its complete and irreversible loss. Regardless of whether one agrees with Dostoevsky's philosophical conclusions, his profound insights and brilliant works of literature possess the power to remind us and allow us to feel this same beauty and depth in life while the opportunity still remains.